Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Sustainable Finance Podcast. My name is Paul Ellis, and I'm your host for these programs about developments in this fast-growing industry. After a 25-year financial market and banking career, Scott Donachie founded Companies for Net Zero, that's CNZ, which brings together global business leaders via summits and networking events to share insights on delivering immediate climate outcomes. CNZ also publishes daily climate insights and education via its CNZ Eco Forum smartphone app, which our followers will learn about in this episode. Since founding CNZ 5 years ago, Scott has built an extensive network of sustainability-focused business leaders in the New York metro area who are committed to delivering climate outcomes beyond talk. The Sustainable Finance Podcast will be participating in CNZ's upcoming Circularity Summit on May 18th and the Decarb New York Summit on September 14th, which will focus on practical decarbonizing of New York real estate assets in response to Local Law 97, which we will discuss in a moment. But first, I'd like to say a few words about our sponsor. If you're tuning in to this podcast, then you already understand the crucial role finance plays in the transition to a sustainable future. With the right individuals leading the way in top companies, sustainability becomes more than just a buzzword. That's why we're excited to have Acre as our sponsor. As a world-leading sustainability search and recruitment team, Acre enables organizations to create real change by embedding and developing purpose-driven people in their teams. Visit the Acre website to learn more about their latest opportunities or to get in touch about building your perfect team. Hello, Scott, and welcome to the Sustainable Finance Podcast.
Yeah, thank you, Paul. It's an honor. Thank you so much.
Scott, we're going to jump right in here to the questions that I have for you today. And the first one is about Local Law 97. Why is Local Law 97 so important for addressing climate change? And if you could give our listeners a little background on Local Law 97, that would be helpful.
Absolutely. Thank you. So Local Law 97 is a law that's setting the guidelines for any buildings that are over 25,000 square feet in Manhattan, that they must reduce their carbon emissions moving forward by 2024. This legislation has been put in place by New York. Building owners, REITs, landlords, and corporate tenants are going to have to abide by Local Law 97. The nice thing about Local Law 97 is that it's setting the guardrails for other cities in the U.S., Boston, Chicago, San Francisco, all the major cities, D.C., and they have different laws, but this is really the precedence and probably the most aggressive legislation in the United States to decarbonize buildings, which account for 40% of greenhouse gas emissions globally. So it's really important that we get the right people to come together to lead this in New York. And that would include the building owners, that would include the corporate tenants that are in these buildings, that would include the architects, the engineers, all the technology companies, the consultants. It's a very complicated process, if you will, to decarbonize. There's over 50,000 buildings in New York City, and it's going to be a monumental task. But everyone needs to come together in this ecosystem, lean in, learn from each other, and really have a growth mindset to move this forward. And what's nice about Local Law 97 and the legislation is that it's putting together in place the economic incentives for organizations to be proactive, to learn about decarbonization and what they can do to move forward, to lower rents, to get higher premiums, in the case of retrofitting buildings, older buildings. So this is all very important for people to combat climate change. And there's also, as I mentioned, a really big economic component that's driving this forward.
Yeah, thanks for mentioning the economic component there, Scott, because clearly what we're reading in the news on a day-to-day basis is the fact that a lot of companies that have been headquartered and or have had offices pre-pandemic in New York City, they have a lot of their workers working from home, some of the
Yes.
time at least. So this is a big change in the way the infrastructure of the city is going to be accommodating companies. Can you say a little bit more about that?
Absolutely. Well, I'll share some stories. So, when you have this legislation put in and you have an army of, politicians and attorneys, and they put this in years ago, after COVID hit, things have changed dramatically. A lot of people are, obviously working remote. I live in New Jersey. A lot of my very good friends work in banking down in Wall Street area. They're working remotely. What's happened is now, you have occupancy rates that may be at, let's say, 50 or 60% of a building in New York. What's really interesting about this, let's say you have an older building and it hasn't been upgraded at all, and it's only at 50% occupancy rate. The carbon emissions for that building are going to be substantially lower than a building that's at, let's say, 80 or 100% occupancy that could be very, carbon intensive. Let's say a data center or a banking center or somewhere where they're trading. Or so what's really interesting is that some of these companies may be penalized for having a lot of workers working in these fully occupied buildings in New York City. So it's really kind of backwards. And I think that legislation needs to be restructured on a bespoke basis based on where the building location is, how many tenants they have, what is their footprint. And there's very important steps on Local Law 97 to really plan this out. So the 4 steps that we talk about at Companies for Net Zero, we phrase it as what's called MPET. So the first is, for the M, is measuring the carbon in the building. So it's bringing in the companies that can come in, and there's incredible technologies through AI, a lot of engineers that are working on this that can go into these buildings and find out what are the specific needs of the carbon emissions. The second is the planning. So having these goals set up, so they're short-term goals of a quarter, a half a year out, of how do we plan, and bringing in the Deloittes of the world, the McKinseys, experts that are in the built environment that can come in and talk to the building owners and let them know, and the landlords, what needs to be done to comply with Local Law 97. The third part of it, the E, is the engagement. So the engagement is getting this complex ecosystem of the engineers, the building owners, the city planners. Another really big part of this is the financing for net zero. So the banks, the private equity funds that can unleash this capital or open up capital with green bonds and other ways, creative ways to help them with financing a lot of these net zero projects. And then the D is the delivery. So what are the specific technologies that exist that can help with decarbonizing buildings? Bringing in, solar, bringing in air flushing toilets, bringing in battery storage, bringing in all the right technologies. There's still a lot of corporate inertia with Local Law 97, a lot of inertia with some of the building owners that may not have the resources or a sustainability director to understand this. And this is where our organization is coming in to bring all the people that can really lean in and learn from each other. And they need to really develop or have a growth mindset of continuously learning. For example, I know the Biden administration in the last week or so has come up with building codes, an updated list of building codes. So if I'm putting in, specific piping, or I'm retrofitting a building and moving away from gas to electric, those building codes are going to enable that building owner to get a tax write-off and a tax benefit. So it's quite complex, but very, very exciting at the same time.
Yeah, thanks for that more expanded perspective on the entire situation. It sounds like it's going to be a lot of hard work, as you said, and a lot of give and take. But at least the focus and the infrastructure is there for the work to go forward. So, now, Scott, we've already mentioned that you left a finance and banking career 5 years ago to begin and to launch Companies for Net Zero. Tell our followers why you did that. Give us some background on why you left banking and finance to launch companies for net zero.
Yeah, thank you, Paul. So it was pretty interesting, in banking, as you mentioned, for 25 years. I ran quite a few hedge fund meetings. I was raising capital, sold hedge fund software, in the whole financial sector for 25 years. I've always had a passion for sustainability. When I went to Rutgers, I worked for what was called New Jersey PERG. I used to knock door to door and raise money for clean water and for the environment. And I had a lot of passion for it when I was back in college. But I had been working on this part time during my banking career, doing a lot of research into the waste industry. That's where I started. And I found out that there was over 400 dormant landfills in New Jersey where I live. And my kids were younger at the time. Now they're 21 and 18. But 5 years ago, I thought, wow, this is not good where all this waste is going into the water system, getting sent to landfills in the Midwest, affecting communities, lower income communities where they incinerate the waste. I was very inspired by a lot of the work that they're doing in Europe and California. And I looked at the area of New York, New Jersey, the whole Northeast, and saw very little being done in sustainability. And also thought to myself, well, we have Wall Street right in our backyard. If these banks and a lot of these private equity funds can get on board and start funding net zero and zero waste, we could really move the needle in the Northeast in sustainability. And then having my background with running hedge fund meetings, that was quite complex. I thought that I could bring that whole skill set into running meetings in New York and New Jersey to bring in the right people and create this whole ecosystem. So that's how it was launched. And it was just really looking at, the capitalistic type of society that we have and seeing this shift of looking at resources because we're running out of resources of like clean water, precious metals and materials. I was fascinated with the circular economy. How can we marry the circular economy and reducing carbon emissions along with zero waste? How do we marry the two? And how do we get everyone educated to understand that we can make money and at the same time we can have really positive impact on the environment? So that's why I launched the company.
Well, listen, it's very inspiring what you're doing, and I'm excited to be participating in the process with you. So now let's talk about this Circularity Summit that you've got coming up on May 18th, and let's begin with your understanding of what sustainability experts mean when they reference the circular economy.
I think when you look at the circular economy, we're looking at this linear economy that we've been in, for what's a pure capitalistic society. And capitalism's great. It's created jobs. It's been, a wonderful, economic system, over the last 70 years, 100 years in the US. Now we see this, the whole pivot into the circular economy. What does a circular economy mean? I see it as, the need for companies to start allocating capital towards hiring, let's say, material engineers, material scientists, people that can come in and learn about, changing the packaging, for an organization. They can learn about landfill diversion, and it all starts with the C-suite. So our whole mission with circularity is to really bring in not just chief sustainability officers because they play a great role, but how do we also bring in really smart, educated students that can learn and pivot in and get these jobs where they're long, lasting, meaningful jobs in sustainability. And we see this really big transition going over the last 5 years in circularity. We're running a job fair. I just got off the phone this morning with Rutgers, also on November 3rd. And they're really excited about, having a job fair. And what's really interesting with circularity, we have a woman on our board, Rachel Dreyfus, who she worked at Accenture for years, but she did a research piece, and 73% of millennials down to Generation Z are making their purchasing decisions and their job decisions based off of climate change. Many of them right now, because of the economy, are living at home with their parents. So this is affecting over 200 million Americans that are making their decisions for everything based off of, circularity. What we're finding, is that there is this inertia, for people that are, let's say Generation X, my age or older, when they hear these terms, and then it becomes kind of political. But then we go into the younger generation, they're really starting to get it when we go over to Columbia University last week, or Rutgers, or Montclair State, and they're super excited about this whole movement. And this is really what inspires me about circularity.
That's great. I'm really looking forward to participating in that event on May 18th. And along the way in our conversations here, you've introduced me to a new role in corporate America, head of net zero delivery and innovation, which I know our sponsors at Acre will want to learn about. Can you describe it for our followers for the Sustainable Finance Podcast now?
Yeah, so we feel, speaking to a lot of different companies over the last 5 years, there is obviously a challenge with people in corporate America. I worked in corporate America for years, big companies, big banks, of individuals working in silos. Unfortunately, with the position of a chief sustainability officer, they have a really great job and an overwhelming role of driving sustainability in the organization. So they're putting out their sustainability report. They're answering to marketing. They're educating everyone on what they're doing in sustainability. We feel that there needs to be a direct correlation with the CSO into the C-suite, and this new role of a net zero implementation officer would be someone that would be next in line to C-suite or CEO of the company. The challenge right now is, if I'm a CEO of a company or C-suite of a company, let's say I'm in my late 50s, I'm going to retire in 6 years. I don't have any type of economic incentive for a net zero goal that's 2040, 2050, because I'll be retired. We feel that this new role also needs to have someone that has operational experience, financial experience. They understand the supply chain of the company, and they can report to the CEO. And it's going to be very, very important to understand all this because of the new SEC disclosures that are coming out by the end of 2023. Companies will have to report on their scope 1, 2, and 3. And this new role is going to be very, very pivotal in driving net zero forward. Europe obviously is ahead of us, probably 7 to 10 years with this, with companies that are headquartered in Europe. And there are companies already that are driving these type of initiatives in Europe. We see it with Heineken, we see it with IKEA, and they're compensating this new role as well based on their sustainability initiatives and their net zero targets, with bonuses and with incentives. So we feel this is very, very important to move the needle. There's also what we call in corporate America the frozen middle. So we want to make the people that are in sustainability many celebrities within their organization, if you will. So if we have someone, for example, the Chief Sustainability Officer, Ann Tracy of Colgate, she's been working with us for years. If they come out, with a new, recycled toothpaste tube, or they have a partnership with another company, we want everyone at Colgate to start understanding what they're doing in sustainability. So that could be the people that are in procurement. That could be an attorney. It could be someone in IT. What we find is the person that's working 9 to 5 on their job. Sustainability right now, there's a great deal of corporate inertia because they look at sustainability as not being part of their 9 to 5. So they don't have any type of interest in it. But if you have that economic, financial incentive tied to the SEC disclosures, you have a leader who's reporting to the C-suite, who's next in line to be possibly the CEO, that's going to drive real change in net zero.
All right, so now we've talked, and you've mentioned a couple of times, the Chief Sustainability Officer role, which is being integrated into many companies as we continue to develop these processes. And I've noticed some chief sustainability officers on the rosters of your events, the speakers and the sponsors of the events. What's your take on how this executive role, often as part of the C-suite now, is developing in importance and authority across different sectors of the economy?
Yeah, so the role of chief sustainability officer is transitioning to a role, again, that is going to resonate with everyone in the company. They've been working in a silo, if you will, of a smaller sustainability team. With the SEC disclosures, being mandated at the end of the year, there's that economic incentive. For example, the Biden administration just last November allocated $390 billion for companies that have federal contracts to report on scope 1 and 2, and eventually they're going to have to report on scope 3. So this economic incentive for companies is really, really important. That chief sustainability officer has to have that type of growth mindset to lean in to accounting, to lean into finance, to lean into legal, and get everyone on board to start learning about disclosures, about how products and goods are manufactured, how do they reduce carbon emissions in their facilities. It's a very, very daunting task. We also felt over the last, let's say, 10 or 15 years that a lot of the focus has been on marketing. So again, instead of tripling down on marketing efforts, which we understand are very important, these companies are going to have to invest into supporting their chief sustainability officers and their team with higher paying salaries and with the resources to share all their findings with the rest of the organization. And that can drive real change. And we're going to see some really big changes going on. If the companies also, too, are, use the G word, right, greenwashing, and they're not pivoting and making a change within what we call, again, the frozen middle in the organization, they're going to be massively disrupted because they're not going to be able to have the ability to some of these large green bonds that are coming out of Europe. They're not going to have the ability to hire, new staff. These younger kids today want to work for a company that's dedicated towards climate change. So all of these are great key factors for the chief sustainability officer moving forward.
You've mentioned the corporate procurement guidelines that came out recently regarding how the companies that interface as the suppliers for the federal government with a majority of their procurement needs are going to be looking at how this, or the federal government's going to be looking at how this almost $400 billion of capital or procurement money is going to be spent. And then you've also got the IRA Act that is another $400 billion. And I've heard some estimates that this could turn into a $1 trillion business on an annual basis, actually, over the next 3 or 4 years. So we'll see what's happening, and we'll keep in touch, and we'll get your perspective again soon on this issue. And Scott, we've run out of time for today. We'll continue this conversation later. But where online can followers of the Sustainable Finance Podcast learn more about companies for net zero, and how can they get in touch with you to speak about the issues we've discussed in today's episode?
Yeah, so they can go on to companiesfornetzero.com, which is our website. Also, I would recommend our app, which is the CNZ Eco Forum. The app is available for them to download for free and learn everything about net zero. And they can also email me at sdonachie@companiesfornetzero.com, and I'll get back to them and I can let them know how we can partner in with them.
Great. Well, thanks again, Scott Donachie, CEO of Companies for Net Zero. And for our listeners, if you're ready to take your team to the next level, or if you're an experienced sustainability professional, visit the ACRE website at acre.com to get in touch. With the right individuals leading the way in your company, sustainability becomes more than a buzzword. Let ACRE enable real change by embedding and developing purpose-driven people in your teams. And to our followers, join us again next week for another episode. I'm Paul Ellis, and this is the Sustainable Finance Podcast.